All right, so today I'm gonna kind of go pretty quick. It's not gonna be the most riveting of lessons. We're gonna learn about literary devices, but hopefully it'll go by fast. And then you guys will have some time to work. So today what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna access prior knowledge to the most common literary devices and expand that knowledge by learning some new ones. And then you're gonna review the guidelines for effective summarizing. We're not gonna really put them into practice today. I'm just gonna give you a brief overview because tomorrow we're gonna be annotating two texts, two philosophical texts together and kind of putting that into practice. And then on Friday, we're gonna have some discussions to make sure you guys understood the text. So today I'm just gonna introduce you to the 10 literary devices for 10th grade students and also, long story short, the guidelines to an effective summary. Don't forget that there are two things due. If you didn't give me an index card, with your information on it and a question for me, you want to make sure to get that in. And also the digital locker is due on Friday by 11:59, but you will have some time after class today or the lectures today to finish it. All right, so 10 literary devices for 10th grade students. Most of us should know what literary devices are, right? Yes? Yeah, what are they? Okay, that's okay. I'm going to help you. So, see, I'm so nice. Literary devices are techniques or ways writers use to add meaning to their writing in order to make their works more compelling or interesting to readers. Because it wouldn't be very interesting to read something that's like, I went to the store, I saw my brother, he had a hat on, right? Like you'd be like, make it more interesting. So literary devices are what we use. Most of you guys should know the top 11 literary devices. You should have learned them your freshman year. And I know a lot of you should know them because I'm the one that created them and a lot of the teachers use them. So I know if there's certain teachers you had, you should have learned them. But just in case, I will be nice and I'll do a quick review. So there's simile, which is one of the most common ones. What's a simile? You guys use it all the time, but you probably don't know the name. Yeah, it's a comparison using like or as. Okay, so the way I always remember it, it's like as if. Okay, so she is as skinny as a beanpole, those type of things. Then you have another comparison, which is a metaphor, but those are the comparisons that we make without using like or as. Okay, now what's important about these two is these tend to be little phrases or sentences. They're not very long. Then you have imagery, which is, you know, oh, it was a dark, stormy night, and this happened, and this happened. That paints a picture for you. Then you have symbolism, which is when they use an object to represent something, and then allusions, which is a hint to something. Now, there's a problem with these two things. Do you know what they are? What it is? Okay. These literary devices do not work unless the people that are reading it understand the symbolism or the hint. For example, you see this? What is it? So a dragonfly, okay? To you guys, does that mean anything? No, right? It's a bug, right? You might be like, why did Miss Garcia have a bug on her hand, right? But I studied ancient Chinese poetry, and in ancient Chinese poetry, dragonflies represents or is a symbol for spirits that have come down to protect you, the ones that love you. So for me, this is symbolic of my grandparents or my cousin David. But that doesn't mean anything to you guys, right? To you, it's just a dragonfly. So the people have to understand it. Now, I've also pointed at the United States flag. Do you guys all know what that symbolizes? Yeah, right? But symbolism can also be subjective. So do you think that the symbol of the United States flag means the same thing here as it does maybe right now in Afghanistan? No, it's very different, right? So you have to make sure that when you're using symbolism, that your reader understands what it's symbolic for. The same thing with allusions. Allusions are hints to other things, but here's the problem. They may not understand what you're talking about. So let's say you watch Deadpool. Deadpool has a lot of allusions. He makes a lot of references to other movies and other X-Men. But if you don't know anything about X-Men, are you gonna understand that? No, right? Do you know what the most alluded to book is in the entire world? Huh? It's the Bible. So it was like the Garden of Eden, right? So what's crazy is it's one of the most alluded to books in the entire world. However, it's not as effective anymore because when I was growing up, I was woken up every Sunday and forced to go to Catholic church and listen to the Bible, and my grandma went to church, and everybody I knew went to church, some sort of church. But do people really go to church that much anymore? No. No, there's a shift in the world where most people are now spiritual, but not necessarily religious. There's a difference, right? They may believe in a God, but they may not go to church. So if they're not reading the Bible, if I'm alluding to, let's say, Sodom and Gomorrah, do you know what that is? Okay, if I was to say the city was destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah, that would be lost on you, right? But people who've read the Bible would know that that's the city that God destroyed and turned the people into pillars of salt. Okay, so allusions and symbolism only work if the people reading the stuff know what you're talking about, right? I can make allusions all day long and it's gonna just go right over your head if you don't know what it's talking about, okay? Personification, that's when you take something that's not alive and make it alive. My perfect example is in the parking lot is my vehicle. It is a girl and her name is Big Booty Bertha because she swings her big old butt around corners. And she's not real, but I talk to her and I'm like, girl, you got this, this and that, because I want to make sure she keeps driving. That's personification. We do it all the time. We take things that aren't alive and make them live, okay? Foreshadowing, you guys see that mostly in movies. Have you ever watched a movie and you're like, I know what's coming? Yeah, they give you hints and you're like, I got it. I know this is gonna happen. That's foreshadowing. Hyperbole. Teenagers are really good at this and people in general are really good at this. That's exaggeration, so extra. They're like, oh, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. I haven't eaten in days. You ate in days. You're like, give me that, right? This Garcia's work is gonna take me 20,000 hours. No, it's not, okay? Diction is words, words, words. It's the words that you choose to use when you're writing. So like when you're doing writing for the Star, you're gonna be more formal and academic. But if I'm asking you to write a narrative, you could use slang. You could talk the way that you talk, right? You could use text language. That's diction. Repetition is obvious. It's when things are repeated. One of the most common ones is I have a dream. I have a dream. And then also music uses repetition a lot. You know how it repeats the same lines over and over again? That's repetition. And then here's onomatopoeia. Do you guys remember what that one is? It's the sounds. Boom, crash. Whenever they use sounds, that's onomatopoeia. Fair warning, I cannot spell this. So whenever we do annotations and we see that, I'm just gonna put ono, because don't ask me to spell it, okay? So that's 11 literary devices you guys should have some sort of an idea of, because you should have learned about them in freshman year. Today, I'm gonna teach you 10 new ones that are kind of like the grown-up versions of some of those other ones. It's not gonna be the most riveting, but we're just gonna give you a brief, I'm gonna give you a brief overview, and then you guys will get used to them as we go on through the year because we'll talk about it, okay? So the first one is an allegory. So I'm gonna provide you, so here is the actual definition of what it is, and here's like a plain speak definition. Here's examples, and then this is what they're used for and what they're similar to. So an allegory is a story or narrative that uses characters, settings, events, and objects to represent specific ideas in order to convey a deeper meaning. So it's kind of like symbolism and illusion. So symbolism, it represents something, but it's not just an item, it's a whole story. Have you ever been talking to somebody or they're talking to you and they're trying to get you to understand an idea, so they tell you like a short story? That's an allegory, okay? Sometimes it happens in movies. Mr. Flowers, welcome. Have a seat. So that's an allegory. So it's basically a story within a story. You can have a seat, Robert. So remember I told you the Bible is the most alluded to text, right? Do you know what the second set of texts are that's alluded to a lot? No? Greek mythology. Okay, Greek mythology is one of the second, it's the second most referred to text, the stories and the fables that come from it. Because of that, I'm going to try to incorporate some of those little stories in throughout the year because you'll need them when you're like in English 3 and 4 and if you go off to college. So one allegory that's often used is the story of Icarus. Have you guys ever heard of that? You have? Okay. Have you ever heard the term, you flew too close to the sun? Okay. So the overview of the story is that Icarus and his father are trapped on an island. They're trying to escape. The dad figures out a way to make wings out of wax and feathers. And he tells his son, here's, yes. Oh. Yeah. So basically what happens is they make the wings and they're about to take off. And the father tells him, don't fly too high because if you fly too high, you'll be too close to the sun and it'll melt your wings. Well, lo and behold, what do you think Icarus does? He flies too close to the sun, his wings melt, and he plummets into the ocean and he dies. So here's an excerpt of it. It says, his wings wavered, drooped, he fluttered his young hands vainly. He was falling, and in that terror he remembered that the heat of the sun had melted the wax from his wings, the feathers were falling one by one like snowflakes, and there was none to help. He fell like a leaf tossed down the wind, down, down. So the deeper meaning, when they include these stories, is they're looking for deeper meaning, is too much hubris, and hubris is a high-level vocabulary word. Basically means you're too cocky, right? You think too highly of yourself, you have too much confidence, or too much confidence or pride can be dangerous. So you have to know your limits, right? He needed to not fly so high. So this will sometimes be incorporated into movies and stories where they're trying to tell you to know your limits, okay? Now we have The Invisible Man. This is a well-known book by Ralph Ellison. The pre-AP kids actually, I think, read it. But basically it's a story of an African-American man or young man trying to make his way in America, and how all the different institutions within the United States, like colleges and the people with money, use him for like entertainment and for his resources. So it says, come out of the fog, young man, and remember you don't have to be a complete fool in order to succeed. Play the game, but don't believe in it. That much you owe yourself. Even if it lands you in a straitjacket or padded cell, play the game, but play it your own way. Part of the time at least. Play the game, but raise the ante, my boy. Learn how it operates, learn how you operate. I wish I had the time to tell you only in 5 minutes. So have you ever heard anybody tell you play the game? You need to know how to play the game. It's the game of life. Basically what they're telling you is that people will exploit you. And so you need to play the game to make sure that they don't. It's that deeper meaning. What literary devices from that we reviewed earlier are in this one though? It should be really easy. Play the game, play the game, play the game. Repetition. But it is also a metaphor because it's comparing life to a game, right? And then up here we had similes, right? Like snowflakes. So you see how they kind of work together to make things more interesting. All right, that's an allegory. Then we have an analogy, and people use analogies all the time. It's a more complex comparison that not only shows, but also explains how two things are alike in order to make a point about a comparison. So remember I told you simile and metaphor, they're more like sentences or statements. Analogies give you more information. So every choice you make is like spinning a wheel of fortune. Sometimes you'll get the result you desire, while other times you will end up with something you always hope to avoid. So you see how we have our simile here? And then it goes on to explain it. That's what makes it an analogy. So basically it's comparing life to a spinning wheel and letting you know that every choice has different consequences. Make sense? Okay. Here's another one. It says people are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when the darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed only if there is light from within. So here's our simile again, right? People are similar to stained glass, and the point is people work and act differently in different situations, positive and dark, right? And we know that for a fact, right? Some people, when they're going through a hard time, are very different from when things are good, right? So that's basically what it's trying to tell you. So it's just like a grown-up analogy. I mean, a grown-up simile or metaphor. It's giving you more information. Any questions? Like I said, we're just doing brief overviews. This one you guys use all the time. They're called colloquialisms. Have you guys ever heard of that? All right. It's a really fancy word for everyday speak. So colloquialisms are the everyday type of terms and phrases that you use in a region. So it's a word or phrase or expression that is informal, conversational, and often used in everyday language. The most popular one is here, especially in the United States, that around the United States, we have different versions for carbonated beverages. So my stepbrother is from Northern Vermont. And one of the first times I met him, he was like, oh, do you want some pop? And I'm like, well, I don't know what a pop is. So, because where I'm from, everything is Coke. Every carbonated drink is Coke. Do you want a Coke? And you can be like, yeah, I'll take a Sprite. And that makes perfect sense to me, right? Or Dr. Pepper, which is king in this world. And if you ever love Miss Garcia enough, you can bring me Dr. Pepper because I love it. but other places say different things. Also, another example is when I moved to Georgia. Okay, there's a lot of colloquialisms in that area where everybody says it, right? So this one time, this guy's like, "Yeah, I got some new jewelry," and I was like, "Jewelry?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got some new jewelry." And he's like, "See, my ring, my ring." And I was like, "Jewelry?" And he's like, "No, it's jewelry." He's like, "I reckon you've never heard of it." And I was like, "I reckon." And he's like, "Well, I'll be going." And I'm like, "Be going where? What are you talking about?" Right? But everybody else knew what he was talking about. And then after a while, I learned this is jewelry, right? Jewelry. And I'd be going to the stores. I'm going to the store, and I reckon is I think. So those are colloquialisms. Mark Twain is a very well known for his colloquialisms. You guys heard of Mark Twain? Yes, please, at least. I mean, you may not have read him, but you've heard about him. Okay. He's a really famous American author, and he's known for using colloquialisms, so much so that it can be very hard to read him because he uses a lot of twang in his writing, and so it can be really confusing. But I did find one that was pretty tame. It's what's the use of learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and it ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same. Ain't no trouble and just the same are the colloquialisms. We use ain't all the time, and it's not really a word. There's no real world word that's ain't. So don't ever write that in a paragraph or essay for me. Then we have Catcher in the Rye. Salinger is another well-known author. He says, "When I was all set to go, when I had my bags and all, I stood for a while next to the stairs and took the last look down that goddamn corridor. I was sort of crying. I don't know why. I put the red hunting hat on and turned the peak around to the back, the way I liked it. And then I yelled at the top of my goddamn voice, 'Sleep tight, you morons.' I'll bet I woke up every bastard on the whole floor. And then I got the hell out." So one, goddamn, the way he spelled it, that would be considered a colloquialism, right? Sort of crying, sleep tight, right? One of the biggest issues most of my ESL kids have is some of the phrases we use, right? I bumped into my friend, or I ran into my friend. I once had a student really worried because they're like with a car ran into them. No, they met up. They're morons and bastards. So it is different from slang because it's actually understood by the whole region. So there's a lot of things, terms you guys use that I may not understand, or like your parents may not understand. That's slang. That's very relevant to your age group. Colloquialisms, everybody in the area would know about. Okay, make sense? So like when we're driving frontage road, do you guys know what a frontage road is? Okay, well that's not what they're called everywhere else in the United States. So we know what a frontage, like, oh, you're gonna take the frontage road and you're gonna go over there. That's a colloquialism. Okay. Euphemisms. This is also huge in the South. Basically, they're phrases used to substitute or replace other phrases that may be viewed as unpleasant, rude, or harsh in order to appear more polite. They're similar to political correctness, but political correctness is kind of like to avoid argument. Euphemism sounds nice, but they're really not. So the most popular one, if you're from the South, especially if you're from the South, is bless your heart. Have you guys ever heard that? Oh, bless your heart, right? It sounds so nice, but everybody that's from the South knows that really means like, oh, you're so stupid, right? Like, right? Or in Spanish, oh, pobrecita, like, you're so dumb, right? So, but it sounds super nice. Those are euphemisms. Older people are really good at them. People your age are not quite as good as them because you tend to be more blunt and straight and frank. But when you get to the older generations, they used to use euphemisms all the time. So like this one, Thomas seems sincere, but I knew he was just blowing smoke. Blowing smoke is a way to say you're lying. This one, we hear all the time when companies are downsizing. That's just a nice way of saying they're firing everybody, right? And then so we also have the term mad or differently moral. That used to be a euphemism for saying they were crazy or insane. Now, off their rocker, those types of things, those would be considered idioms, which are just other phrases that have different meanings, but they're not as polite. So think of using euphemisms as just trying to be polite, right? So that's what that is. Any questions so far? Okay, here's one of Ms. Garcia's favorite words. Yes, I do have favorite words because I'm that kind of nerd. But also if you use this, if you learn how to use this term, people are gonna think you're really smart. It's called juxtaposition. And basically it's when you put two very different things next to each other. Because what happens when you put two very different things next to each other is it highlights their differences so that you can pay attention to them. Okay, so for example, the butler spends his days in a beautiful mansion dressed in a tuxedo, but returns home to a closet-sized apartment in a rundown part of town. So by seeing how he is at work in the tuxedo around all these riches, very much highlights how much he does not have when he goes home. Okay, here's one from Animal Farm. How many of you read Animal Farm? Nobody? Be glad. This is one of the few books Miss Garcia, if she could, would burn, but it's okay. So the premise of Animal Farm is there's these animals on a farm and they become intelligent and they can speak, and then they start to plan to overthrow the human, the farmer, and the pigs start to take over and become like these crazy, cruel, like dictator type animals and starts oppressing all the little animals. So it says 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. So what they're juxtaposing is both the man and pigs with the creatures outside to show you that in reality, it was the man and pigs that are actually the crazy animals and not the other ones. So it's anytime you put two very different things next to each other and it highlights their differences, okay? And it really does draw attention to other things. A common one is when they put a really young person next to a really old person, and that juxtaposes the differences in them, okay? So learn how to use that word, and you'll sound really smart. Overstatement. Most humans are really good at overstatement, and we do it all the time without even realizing it. It's just an amped up form of exaggeration. So it's stating something more profoundly or intensely than it actually is in order to make a point of how serious or important it is. So it is similar to hyperbole, which is an exaggeration, but it's more extreme. And it also has like a grain of truth in it. Because sometimes exaggerations don't have any truth in it. This one kind of does. So like we were so poor that even the mice refused to come into our home because they knew they would not find a single crumb to eat. They're just emphasizing how little they have, okay? This one is from Flannery O'Connor. The skin on her face was thin and drawn tight like the skin on an onion, and her eyes were gray and sharp like points of two ice picks. First of all, what other literary device is being used in here? Simile, yeah, simile, and also imagery, right? So basically what this one's trying to emphasize is the fact that she may appear old. Have you ever seen those old people that are so old that their face is really tight and you can see all the veins? And a lot of times you would think that those people aren't really smart or sharp, but the fact that her eyes are really clear, is trying to indicate that she has a sharp mind. And then this one you guys would probably relate to. I know I related to it when I lived in Corpus. Funny thing is, I used to think Corpus was a very small town. I could not wait to leave. And then I got stuck in Copper's Cove and I realized that Corpus was not so small after all. So it says a day was 24 hours long, but seemed longer. There was no hurry, for there was nowhere to go, nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with, nothing to see outside the boundaries of Macomb County. It's basically emphasizing how mundane and boring it is. So how many times have you guys said there's nothing in Killeen to do? Well, there is, yeah. I say all the time there's nothing to eat in Killeen. I have to go to Austin. But in reality, there really is. That's just an overstatement. There's a grain of truth in it, but there really is stuff we could do. It's probably just not what we'd want to do. Let's see. We're almost done. So oxymoron. I also like this word just because of the fact that it has moron in it. I'm not gonna lie. And we use these all the time, especially in the United States. It's when you take two words that are completely opposite and put it together. For example, original copy. Well, it can't be original if it was copied, right? Only choice. The word choice indicates that there's more than one thing you can choose, so you can't really have an only choice. Virtual reality, passive aggressive. Do you guys know what that means? Passive aggressive. I come from a Hispanic family. We are kings and queens of passive aggressiveness. Live recording, and my favorite, jumbo shrimp, because where I'm from. So another example, the new couple enjoyed being alone together. Well, you can't really be alone if you're with somebody else. And then this one, I love this one. This is from Salinger. I'm the most terrific liar you ever saw in your life. Now, these are not necessarily contradictory in their meanings, but this is a positive connotation, right? Terrific, and then liar is considered bad, but I very much like that. So we use those ones all the time. Any questions? I know y'all are riveted. Okay, paradox. You guys have probably heard of paradox in science, or maybe, I don't know if you guys, have you guys heard of paradox in science yet? That might be a college thing. Okay, well, there are paradoxes in science. This one's for literature. And in literature is when something might seem contradictory, but when you think about it, it can be true. Have you ever had somebody say something and you're like, what? And then later you're like, oh, wait a minute, that made sense. That's a paradox, okay? So some examples are the beginning of the end. The pen is mightier than the sword. What does that mean? The pen is mightier than the sword. Have you guys ever heard that? No? So the pen is mightier than the sword is basically the concept that your brain is stronger than your actual physicals. That more can be done with words than actually with weapons. The best way out is always through, and the only constant is change. So here's an example from a movie I love. How many of you have seen Scarface? Okay, a couple of hands. All right. So most of you may not have seen it, but I'm pretty sure you've heard a phrase from it. Say hello to my little friend. How many of you have heard that? I'm pretty sure all of you. Yes, that's from Scarface. Don't tell your parents, but I think you should go see it. It's pretty cool. Along with Godfather, but that one is a little long. It's a little long. But it's actually a pretty interesting movie, and it's considered one of like the best movies of all time, so you should see it. But one of the times Tony Montana says, me, I always tell the truth, even when I lie. So that sounds contradictory, right? How can you tell the truth and lie? But if you actually think about it, how many times have you guys told a lie, but there's some kernel of truth in it? Right? So that's pretty much what he's trying to say. There's another one from Faulkner. I could just remember how my father used to say that the reason for living was to get ready to stay dead a long time. So this one might not have as much impact on you guys, but when I was growing up, I would hear, oh, you need to be good because you want to go to heaven, right? Everybody was really religious. Oh, you want to go to heaven, you want to go to heaven. So it seemed like everything you were doing was just to try to get to heaven. Or are you really enjoying life if that's all you're worried about? So that's what that's trying to say. So that's a paradox. Anytime you literally, when you make a face when somebody says something, you're like, what? And then later it's like, oh, wait, okay, that's a paradox. Okay, any questions? There's only a couple more, I promise. All right, parallelism. You guys have probably heard about this in math, but this is the English one. And it's basically when you use similar structures or grammatical structures. You guys hear it a lot, especially like in songs and rap. So no pain, no gain. To get what you get. I think, therefore I am. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. People hear this all the time when it comes to relationships. There's every time you smile at someone, it is an action of love, a gift to that person, a beautiful thing. And then Neil Armstrong's, that's one step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I am not gonna lie, I hate trying to look for parallelisms. They just irritate me, but you will see a lot of this in poetry, okay? And the last literary device for today is an understatement. So it's the opposite of an overstatement. It's when it's written, something serious is written to be less important than it really is. So when I said that The Godfather is just a little long, that's an understatement because it's like really, really long, like Harry Potter long. So some of the ones is like, there was one time when they were showing all the flooding in Houston. You remember when Houston flooded? And they were interviewing a guy and he said, it rained a little bit more than usual. Sir, your house is floating down the street. I think it rained a little bit more than that, right? And then this one, I have to have an operation. It isn't very serious. I have a tiny little tumor on my brain. Well, that's a little more serious than just a tiny little tumor, right? A lot of understatements. My favorite ones are from my ESLs. They'll come and they say, I'm struggling a little bit. And then I look at their report card and they're not passing anything. I'm like, a little bit, sir. Jesus. Or my grade's a little low, and it's like a 2. Sir, like a 65 is what I was thinking, but a 2. So understatements, teenagers and people who are in trouble tend to use understatement a lot, right? Oh, there was a little dent in the car, you know, and it's like all the half side of it's like crushed in, you know, there's a little mishap, right? I'm not gonna lie, my dad uses this a lot. I always tell my parents they're not allowed to deliver important information to me because they'll call and there's like, well, there's been a little bit of a development with Eusebio. Oh, really, Dad? What was it? Well, he was murdered. Sir, that needs to have a more serious introduction than a little mishap. That's pretty like permanent kind of thing. So that's understatement. So now with the 11 that you learned last year, plus these 10, you should know at least 21 literary devices. So you can go out there and show off and be smart to people. And then if they ask you what it actually means, you can just be like, oh, I'll get back to you. But at least you can name some of them. But the one that will get you the most clout is colloquialisms and juxtaposition, because most people don't know what those are. Any questions on those? All right, perfect. So moving right along. So real quick, I just want to give you some guidelines for effective summaries, because when we do annotate, I do ask you to provide me a 2 to 3 sentence summary of the text, and there's a reason. When you are able to summarize something that you've read, that shows that you comprehend it. Now, I know you guys have heard about summaries pretty much since you were like in what, 1st grade? So I made the mistake thinking that since kids probably have heard about this since elementary, that of course they know how to write summaries, of course. And then my 1st year teaching, I asked for a summary and I was very much mistaken. I was pretty much getting the entire text back to me in the author's words. And one of the first rules of summaries is that you use your own words. If I wanted to read the author's words, I would just go read that text. And I promise you, if I'm giving you the text, I probably read it 1,000 times myself. So I want to know what you think it means, okay? But there are some guidelines to make sure that you do write an effective summary, and they're pretty simple. And I know that they work because I got the information from Harvard. So basically, you're going to identify the author and the title. So you would say, like, Miss Garcia wrote in her article, she's amazing, that blah, blah, blah. Right? So you will always include that because that's giving credit where credit's due, and I'm going to show you how to do that next week. Write in present tense. That's a big problem in the United States is we tend to flip-flop our verb tenses because we never tell a story in a straight line. Have you ever noticed when you're trying to tell a story, you start the story and then you're like, oh, but this made me think of this and this was in the past and let me do over here. So we have problems when we write that way. So just write in the present tense. Use 3rd person. You know what 3rd person is? Okay, I always think of the villains. Villains always talk in 3rd person, which I don't know how I feel about that because Ms. Garcia also talks in 3rd person. So maybe I'm a villain, I don't know. Maintain neutrality. So when I'm asking you for a summary, I'm not asking you to take a side. This year though, almost every paper you write, you will take a side because your star essay has to be persuasive. But when I'm asking for summaries, just tell me what you read. Later, I might tell you, what did you think about that? But when you're just providing me the summary, just tell me what they said. And if you do use portions of the text, you're going to put it in quotations, but I'm going to show you how to do that next week. So those are some guidelines. We'll put both the literary devices and the summary into practice tomorrow when we annotate, because you guys all did do the annotations last year, yes? Right, yes, yes. So I should just be able to do like a quick rehash and then we can dive into the annotations, yes? Okay, all right. Any questions? Okay, so that's it for today. Use the rest of the time to finish your digital locker if you didn't, or if you have like another assignment that's like due tomorrow for somebody else, just get it done, okay?